Okay.
Thank you once again, travelers, for joining me. I'm excited. My name is April with the Travel Collective, and I have my own small tours. And as a traveler, I think the concept of travel insurance, if you've gone through life feeling healthy for many years, going somewhere, maybe you just traveled domestically, it hasn't really crossed our minds until maybe the last couple years when everything was shut down due to COVID, but there's so many other reasons to consider different types of travel insurance. You might want to think about what kind of insurance you need to get. If you do a quick internet search, there's a lot of information out there and a lot to dive into. You may have some coverage, but it may not cover you for what you need and what could happen to you. So I'm excited to have Kathy Dunn join me today. She's a traveler. She's traveled, oh my gosh, around the world, many, many countries, places I have never yet seen or been. She's traveled in various ways, whether it's cruise ships, small group tours, big companies. So she's very well traveled, and I'm excited to have Kathy join me today.
Thanks for having me, April.
So let's start with just the idea of travel insurance. Is it something you've always bought travel insurance on your many, many trips, or have you selectively bought depending on the type of trip? Talk a little about
I,
that.
I think that I started getting travel insurance after I had a friend who had a problem when she was in Bali, and she didn't have travel insurance, and she was staying at an all-inclusive resort. Um, and uh, they had to stop their trip on their second day, and she was hospitalized, which they had to pay for. And then when the physician gave her clearance to come home, he said, you need to come home, but you have to travel first class. And so they had to buy, like a last minute first class ticket, which isn't going to be cheap. And it was her and her husband, and they didn't have any travel insurance. So
Wow.
when she came back, it was somebody I worked with, and she told me this story. I started thinking, I need to pay a lot more attention to what I'm getting on my own trips, because I always got cancellation insurance,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't always um, getting a policy that included medical care and especially medical repatriation to the United States.
Right.
So I would say for the last 15 years I've been doing that, but before that I really didn't pay that much attention to it.
Right. So in the last 10, 15 years or whatever that you've been getting travel insurance, have you, and specifically it sounds like medical insurance, have you gone with different companies? Is it something that's been included in some of the types of travels if it's a package
Yeah.
tour?
So I've gone through different companies. Um, Sometimes when I travel with a major tour company and they offer their own insurance company, I've just gone ahead and gone with them, which is what I did this last trip. And fortunately, that worked out. But um, I have used, oh gosh, I can't remember this website where you can look for all
Oh,
different
Square
kinds.
Mouth. I think we talked.
Yes, Mouth. I've used that before to select um, travel insurance when I wanted to get it separate from who I was going with, or when I was traveling by myself.
Right. And what are some of the questions that people should think about asking either themselves or the travel insurance provider?
Well, you definitely want to think about the cancellation insurance, which usually covers things like missed flights, canceled flights, um, your ability to cancel the trip, up to a certain deadline and get a full refund. lost luggage, things like that, So that's the first part, and that's usually the cheapest option. But then when you look at the medical part, you want to be sure that it has enough coverage to pay for health care in a foreign country. If you get sick in the United States, usually your insurance will pay. But I'm on Medicare, and Medicare doesn't pay for any medical care outside the United States. So I like this trip, I looked at coverage, and it covered up to, I think it was $100,000 of care in the country, and then up to another $100,000 for medical repatriation, which could be either by medical air ambulance or by commercial flight. And I had also booked a trip, which sadly I had to cancel, to Antarctica.
Oh, wow.
And when I looked for the insurance for that, which I did on Squaremouth, I made sure that it would cover, because I know how expensive it is to come back from someplace, even like Argentina,
Right.
much less Ushuaia or someplace like that. And in fact, when I booked that trip, which was with Hurtigruten, they said very specifically, have you gotten insurance that will be sufficient to return you to the United States if something happens? So they wouldn't even let you book unless you said that you had bought that kind of insurance.
Yeah, and that's smart, and that's something to point out too. We see a lot of big companies, but also now there's a lot of boutique companies, and even on these Facebook groups where women are getting together and going with smaller outfits. And I'll admit I lead those kinds of tours as well. So I think as a participant, I think it is important to ask the tour provider, again, what is the cancel policy? If I get sick or I fall and break my leg and I'm not able to take your trip, what are you offering as far as the cancel part? But then also, if you're going with someone overseas, if you're going with someone that's taking you collectively to London or, in some of these countries, right, we think that they have good coverage, which we're going to get into in a minute with your trip, and that they, people there speak English, it shouldn't be a problem, but we just never know what could happen. And especially as I'm going to say it, I'm a solo female traveler 99.9% of the time. I'm not going with a spouse to some of these trips. I may not have a sister or even anyone else that could speak for me. If I go unconscious, what is my backup plan? What is going to happen?
Right. And, last year when I had some health problems that my physician wouldn't let me travel,
Oh, yeah.
I did have to cancel a couple trips, for medical reasons,
Yeah.
and they required letters from my physician. They required medical records to be sent from my physician's office to them to be sure that this was a legitimate, reason to cancel my trip. So it's not always easy, but at least I had that. And unfortunately, it didn't reimburse me for everything, even though I completely paid off that trip.
Right.
I didn't get back the deposit, plus I think it was another $1,000
Yeah.
on
So
that
those
one,
are,
and that was a river cruise
oh, wow. Oh, dear.
in Europe.
Well, Kathy, let's hear about your recent story. If you want to share a little bit of maybe about where you went and what just in general, maybe what happened, and maybe also I have a quick question before you start. When you book a trip now, and I'm saying this, you can share or not, but I know for myself, I was looking for someone, my relative that has pre-existing conditions. And it's important to find out what they consider pre-existing conditions because this particular person, he's generally healthy, he travels a lot, but he's using a CPAP machine. And I was told a CPAP machine does fall under pre-existing conditions. And
Right.
there's specific then rules as to when you can then buy certain types of policies based on that pre-existing.
Yeah, so I make it a rule that when I book a trip, if I'm not booking the insurance through that travel company, that I go immediately to Square Mouth and find a policy because most of the policies that I've looked at for pre-existing conditions, you have to book the you have to pay for the insurance within 3 days of booking the trip.
Yeah.
If you wait longer than that, it will not cover anything that's a pre-existing condition. And like you said, I mean, there's so many things that are included like that. Say you're hypertensive and you have a stroke. Well, it was the hypertension that caused the stroke. So they would consider that a pre-existing condition.
Oh,
When I traveled with my mother who had multiple sclerosis, we always got her coverage, immediately because, if we were on the trip and she had an exacerbation of her MS, that they would consider that a pre-existing condition, of course. And for myself, I have some heart disease. I'm diabetic, so those things all have to come into consideration.
right. So I think that is important for travelers as unfortunately we age, that we immediately, if we're thinking, we see that great deal, you know, almost immediately, like you said, when you go to purchase it, hop on over to a site like squaremouth.com, which I do like because it does let you put in dates of travel, where you're going, and gives you some options, some starting points at least for choosing. And then you may need to spend a good day. I know today alone I was on the phone for several hours investigating various types of travel insurance and asking lots of questions.
Yeah. So my recent trip on June 29th, I arrived in Iceland for what was supposed to be an 11-day tour. And, the first day, like as soon as we got off the plane, they took us for breakfast at the hotel and then put us back on the bus. And we had a tour of Reykjavik, and then we went to the Blue Lagoon and spent the afternoon at the Blue Lagoon. And then the next morning we got up early and we were headed out to some fairly remote rural areas of Iceland. And I was fine until about 4 o'clock. And we had just had a short hike to a waterfall, and I was probably almost the last person getting back on the bus because I was taking so many pictures. But almost immediately I started having pain in my left arm that was pretty severe. And then I noticed that I couldn't move my left hand at all.
Oh,
And the next stop was just a few minutes away, so I didn't say anything. I thought maybe my arm was asleep or something, And then I went to get off the bus, and that's when I noticed that my left leg was also paralyzed.
oh dear.
So the bus driver and the tour guide had to assist me off the bus and took me into the little museum that we were supposed to be going to, and I laid down on a bench. wasn't feeling any better. So they called the paramedics, and because we were out in such a rural area, I ended up going almost an hour and a half to this little provincial hospital by ambulance. And this little provincial hospital didn't have MRI or CT capability. And
Wow.
the emergency room physician gave me this totally bogus diagnosis that I knew she was wrong. I'm a nurse, and I worked in spinal cord injury care. I knew that something was going on with my spinal cord. Fortunately, the next day I was seen by a different physician. She said, you need to go immediately to Reykjavik University Hospital, another 45-minute ambulance ride. Now, all of these ambulance rides, I had to pay upfront cash to take
Wow.
because I hadn't opened a case yet with my travel insurance company. And it wasn't until I got into at Reykjavik University Hospital that I was able to get a hold of them. And thank God I took my policy number and their phone number with me. So I had it in my backpack,
Oh,
you
nice.
know,
Yeah.
so I knew how to get a hold of them immediately. And but they are in the United States on the West Coast, 7 hours difference. So I was having to make calls, late in the afternoon in Iceland to be able to get them in the morning. And then they kept sending me all these forms to fill out. I had nobody to help me with any of that stuff. But finally, we got all the paperwork done. They got the records they needed from the hospital. And then they sent a travel rescue nurse. I've worked in nursing for 45 years. I've never heard that term used
No.
before, but these are people who work for travel insurance companies, they're contractors, and their whole job is to go and pick up American citizens that are in some other country that are sick but are able to travel by commercial flight and bring them back to the United States.
Wow.
So they sent somebody from Miami to Reykjavik and picked me up. Um, it was supposed to be a pretty direct flight coming back. We were supposed to fly to Heathrow and then from Heathrow directly to San Diego on this once a day British Air flight. Well, we get to the gate in Heathrow. I mean, Heathrow is an absolute madhouse. It was the weekend after 4th of July, and they we got to the gate, and they said, we said we're here to check in. It was an hour and 10 minutes before our flight was supposed to leave. They said, oh, sorry, you had to be here an hour and a half ahead of time, and we gave your seats away.
Oh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so there we were stuck in London, and we actually, in order to find a place to stay the night, we ended up having to go all the way into central London because all the hotels around Heathrow were full of all these other people whose flights had been canceled and stuff.
Oh my goodness.
And we finally found a place. I mean, my nurse was wonderful because he finally gave up on the travel insurance company because they sent us to a totally inappropriate place first. And he said, screw them, essentially.
Yeah.
And he started calling. I swear he must have called every hotel in central London before we found one that had an elevator and a
Wow.
wheelchair that we could borrow because I didn't have a wheelchair with me,
Oh, that's right. Right.
And then the next day we flew out of Gatwick through Toronto and then to San Diego. So, we left Iceland on Saturday at 3 a.m. That's when I left the hospital. And we arrived at the hospital in San Diego at 9 p.m. on Sunday.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah, I was so exhausted because I don't sleep well on the plane. Even in first class seats, I don't sleep well.
Right.
Um, so, I was in the hospital for then 3 more weeks between the regular hospital and the rehabilitation center. Meanwhile, I'm getting a little bit back every day. So it wasn't until I got home that I could scan and submit the bills for the ambulance rides and the one night in the hospital before I got a hold of them. Um, but I was very pleased that because I was told it would probably take up to a month to process that, and that was 2 weeks ago. And yesterday I got a notice that they're paying all of that. They're reimbursing me for all of that. And today I got a notice of how to have them do that by direct deposit to my bank.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, do you remember which travel insurance company this was? Was this
yeah,
one you had
it was Arch.
Arch? Hmm.
Yeah,
It's not one I'm familiar with.
yeah.
But you found it, you said on Square again.
No, this one was because I went on a tour with Gate One,
Oh, Gate One. Okay. So this
and
is what they
this
provided.
is the one that they had. When you went
Right.
and did your registration, they said, "Do you want travel insurance too?" I clicked on that. It opened up a page that showed me, what the policy covered, and I went ahead and accepted that.
Right. Well, it sounds like so far it's been at least dealing with the insurance company fairly.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that they hadn't made me fill out all these forms on my phone because I didn't have a
Oh,
laptop or anything, and trying to do that at that point, I couldn't use my left hand at all. And so, I would try to sit up enough to put my phone
oh
on the
gosh.
overbed table and, hunt and peck on my screen. And of course, I kept making errors because I have a trimmer in this side,
Right.
so.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's too bad that you couldn't, like you said, have them fax it to the hospital. I don't know, some other way, like to get through
Yeah.
this paperwork at least, or just verify some things or something.
And I was so disappointed, because this was the third time I was supposed to go to Iceland. I had to cancel in 2020, obviously. And then last year, when I was having my heart problems, my doctor wouldn't let me travel. I had to cancel that one. And so I thought, for this one, I thought, third time's a charm. This is
Right.
going to go quickly. No, the fates had it out for me.
Oh my goodness. Oh gosh. So
So
I
at
think
this
that
point,
was go
I'm
ahead.
just hoping to get strong enough to be able to travel again.
Exactly. Especially since you had other trips, like you said, booked
Yeah, I was
already.
supposed to go with you to Alaska the first week of September. That was the first one I had to cancel. And then I was supposed to go with Gate One again to New Zealand in November. I know I'm not going to be ready for that. And then I was supposed to go to Antarctica with her to Bruton. And they had already sent me a form that my physician had to sign off on, that I hadn't taken to my physician yet. But it said, is this person fit enough to get on and off a Zodiac by themselves and stuff like that? And I thought, I'm not sure I'm going to be there by February.
Right.
So I canceled those, but still holding on to my river cruise in France from Paris to Normandy and back, with Rhodes Scholar in May.
Right.
I still have a little time to cancel it if I need to, but I'm hoping that, you know, fingers crossed that I will be up to doing that trip.
So when you buy the travel insurance separate, and this may be something that you can or can't answer, I'm just thinking through, it's a question we should ask, because if you buy your travel insurance separate from the group trip, and then like in your case, you've already had to cancel the next 2 to 3 trips, do you need to then contact these insurance places to cancel? And do you get some of your money back? Is there
Well, for both, let's see, well, for the Gate 1 trip to New Zealand, um, I booked that again through their company. So I
Right, that
asked
wasn't
them specifically when I called them if that would also take care of canceling the insurance, and they said yes.
okay.
Um, that I still haven't, I need to call and cancel the insurance for the Hertogruchen cruise because that I booked separately.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a question now I'm going to ask when I'm looking at travel insurance of is if I, because again, you, like we were discussing early on, you can have trip cancellation insurance and you can have medical insurance, and the medical insurance can be completely separate. Like I might, in my case, I may be, because of, if I'm just going domestically, I might be like, you know what, or even just to Europe, I might be like, you know what, the cost of the trip, if I end up having to cancel, it's okay. I'm already going to just wipe that. But as far as the medical, if for some reason at the last minute I don't go on the trip, what can I get back? And is there anything to get back from what I've paid for the medical? So I think that's a good question
Yeah.
to ask.
So, yeah, I mean, it covered, because obviously I didn't complete the tour. So
Right. Yeah.
it covered that under the cancellation insurance. And then, but I keep thinking that if I hadn't had the medical, I'd probably still be in Iceland.
Right.
You know, I mean, being able to get back by myself, even at this point, I don't think I could travel by myself.
Right.
Even though I've gotten so much return in the last month and a half since I've been back to the United States. But
Right. And that's a big thing when you're traveling by yourself to just, even if it's not something, just getting, like you said, on a commercial flight, getting yourself back, buying a ticket, having that travel nurse, I mean, that rescue nurse was well worth the cost right there. I mean, what a lifesaver as far as getting through all the airports and
yeah, he was wonderful. I mean, I can't have no complaints at all. And, they sent me a review to do of him, and I gave him, all the maximum scores. On everything. He did such a good job.
yeah. So I think there's a lot of things to consider when you're thinking about choosing a policy and contacting places. Like I have a AAA card in the United States and they do sell Allianz insurance. You don't get a discount as such for the medical insurance. It would be the same price whether I use a AAA agent or contact an Allianz agent myself. But I think being able to find a local office and go in and actually face to face talk, ask questions, make a list of questions of things that you want to think about, because we don't always think of what ifs when we haven't had the what ifs happen.
Right. So I'm, everybody I talk to now, I'm telling, be sure you get medical repatriation insurance, and medical care insurance. Is not just the trip cancellation insurance.
Right. Yeah,
You
because
never know what's going to happen, especially when you get older. I'm 70, so uh,
right,
uh,
and you can go
one of the
along and
yeah, I mean, one of the things I heard the other day too is that when she hits 75, it gets a lot harder to find companies to cover you.
yes, yeah, that was something Leslie brought up and something that I would highly suggest. I know I was on the MedJet, which Peter Frommer, who's a trusted travel journalist on his website, uses and puts MedJet on his website. He advocates for them. They have a separate kind of plan if your age, and I don't remember the cutoff if you're a certain age or older. So again, looking at the age points, you might have to have a different type of plan. Any pre-existing conditions, I
Yeah,
imagine, if you
and
have,
that may be more expensive.
right, right, it does make it more expensive, but again, the offset of if something happens and you're going to a place where, like even you said in Iceland, thankfully everyone spoke English that you could deal with.
Yeah, I don't know whether it was because I was assigned to staff who spoke English, or whether they all actually, all the staff spoke English, but at least the people that worked with me spoke English. So
Because I know you mentioned too that even getting a room, like you were in just the general emergency room for
I was in the emergency room holding area for 4 days when I got to Reykjavik University Hospital. It was an absolute nightmare. Uh,
yeah. I can't even imagine being
I
so
wouldn't wish that on anybody. Uh,
yeah, and being alone, there's no one to go fetch you, even water if you need anything. I mean, and carrying, I think you brought up an important point too, of always carrying that phone number and policy number. Tuck it somewhere where it's on your body if you're going again with a tour group, giving it maybe even to the tour leader or the tour liaison person so
yeah,
that
well,
they
I
have it.
just keep that in my backpack, my day pack.
Right.
And fortunately, I had all my luggage with me. When the ambulance picked me up, they took my luggage off the bus and put it, in the back of the ambulance, so it went with me.
Yeah, that was good because, like you said, you might have been out for a day trip and then your luggage is now back at a hotel. You're separated. Maybe if you thought you were just going out for a simple day trip, that's when something could happen. And now you're without,
Right.
the phone numbers and policy numbers that you need. And we all know that, we don't remembering all this stuff is almost impossible. So having a small piece of paper or something that someone else could get to.
Well, what I always do before I go on a trip is I copy from the website of the travel company the itinerary,
Oh, smart.
and I make that into a Word document, and then I add on to that my flight times, my confirmation numbers, and then my travel insurance information. So I have all of that in one stapled together document, that I can pull out at any time, and that's saved me for a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. And I also recommend to people too, like I do the same. I'll make that Word document or Excel sheet showing every place I'm gonna stay, um, a contact person like someone else that's with me on the trip, and with their cell phone number, and I'll send that to my family members, like because like I said, 99.9% of the time I'm not traveling with them. So again, should something happen to them stateside and they need to reach me, or vice versa, there's a couple points of contact. And, we know that cell phones, you may not have service, but at least if they know that each day, oh, here's where she's going to be tonight, here's where she's staying, they could at least maybe get contact there
Yeah,
to
and I
that
was
person.
sure glad that I'd had my cell phone company turn on roaming for me before I went on this trip, because I wouldn't have wanted to try to get that arranged at the same time,
Oh, no.
you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
from my
Right. Or from any country. And that is something that you need to check before you leave. I know when I went to Ireland this summer too, before I left, same thing. I contacted my cell phone company and said, what do I need to do to have service? Even I'll pay for the 30 days, whatever it is, but I need, be able to access and use it when I'm there. So,
yeah, because I mean it's not cheap, but I think it's a lot easier than trying to buy a SIM card at
yeah.
the airport and take your phone apart and try to get the SIM card. And because I have an iPhone and it's got that little nano card,
Yes.
they're so hard to change. It's just like,
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. It's like there's a little slot for a micro SD card that is so small, and to get the little, tool or a paper clip unwound to like poke it and open it, and I'm like, no, we're just gonna. It's worth it to just make the phone call, pay the extra money for the 30 days,
yeah,
and do it that way. So this has been super informative. Hopefully, we've given some people some good tools to consider as far as travel insurance. As I mentioned, this is just I hope a couple of videos. I have made some phone calls. I hope to have someone talk to us from some of the companies that are out there, where that's Allianz, or, and I know there's other companies that offer travel insurance and travel medical insurance, to give us some pointers on what they offer. And again, costs, because I don't think all of us even think about, like you were saying, having cash for some of those extra trips.
Yeah, I mean, thank God my both the credit cards that I had with me, I had a, a significant credit line on both of those. So, I wasn't worried that I was, going to get a card declined or something like that. So,
Yeah, and I think that's important too, because with some of these policies too, you may be forced to pay up front for that plane ticket, or for some of the, ambulance or local transportation before you get your travel insurance company involved. So having space, a credit card that you've got probably like $5,000 potentially if you're going international. I wouldn't.
yeah, well, and I ended up paying between the ambulance rides and the first night in the hospital, it was around $7,000.
Right. So that's what I was saying. That's a good ballpark just on that incident alone. So even maybe considering 10,000 having available, that
Yeah,
your credit card company is going to approve you for, because otherwise you may end up somewhere, and if you aren't able to pay,
yeah,
you're just out of luck. You're not gonna get yourself physically to that
yeah.
location.
I mean, some countries that have universal health care, like Iceland, they don't charge foreigners, but Iceland does. So I know uh, years and years ago, I was traveling with my mother in Canada, and we had to go to an emergency room there, and she never got a bill.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was totally free. She had a urinary tract infection. She got diagnosed. She got antibiotics, and they never got a bill.
My goodness. Wow.
And that was back in the 60s.
Right.
So,
That's interesting. Yeah. So it may be good to even get some of these representatives too may know if certain countries, depending on, but again, it can vary so much what country you're in, what part of the country. You may find yourself you're somewhere that doesn't speak English. So again, being able to even have some cash on hand to pay for a cab or a car or ambulance, because sometimes the cash speaks. Let's be honest, that would
yeah,
get you
because
to a medical.
if this had happened on my Southeast Asian trip that I took, where we were in Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, I think it probably would have been a lot more difficult and complex.
Yeah, I would think so too. Yeah. Well, thank
Much,
you.
much less the quality of the care.
Right. And
You
I
know,
think that's where people need to consider that, depending on what country you're going to, what we've become taken for granted as a base level of care may not be what you're getting when you even show up at the emergency room. So the sooner that you can get that repatriation back to the United States, back to your own doctors and someone that knows how to treat you. Because
uh,
even in your case, I mean, you being a nurse, they misdiagnosed you.
right? And the nursing care was, I mean, it had to be like it was 70 years ago. It
Wow.
was, it was not good.
That's so hard to imagine when, like you said, I mean, Iceland we think has come such a long ways, but not so much.
Yeah, I have to admit, but the last day that I was in the emergency room holding area, when they told me I was getting moved up to the neurology floor, which I'd been waiting for so long, I said to the nurse that told me, I said, I have to say this to you, but Florence would be embarrassed for you to call yourself a nurse.
Oh no, dear.
I just couldn't help myself.
Right, yeah, At that point, after 4 days of being
Yeah.
with all that hubbub, not even to be in a room with a more privacy and
Well,
quiet.
and not even, no bathing, no help with my brushing my teeth,
Oh my gosh.
none of that kind of stuff, and when I asked for help with that, they said, oh, well, we don't do that in this area, you know.
Wow.
And and then I said to her after I said that, I said, you know, have you ever read The Notes for Nurses, which is a book that Florence Nightingale wrote that like every nurse in the world owns a copy of that book. And her first principle was good hygiene.
Yes.
And she developed that when she was taking care of soldiers in the Crimea, you know.
Yes, exactly. And the hygiene for so many reasons, even just mentally, you feel so much better if you can clean up and brush your teeth each day, and just it puts you in a different frame of mind to feel more healthy, try hard. I mean, each day that ticks by that you're just treated like that, you just
Yeah. So I think I'm still gonna at some point write a article and submit it to a couple of the journals and see if they'll do from the other side of the bed rail kind of story.
I think you
Uh,
should. I
yeah,
highly suggest that because there is a big difference. And again, in a country like Iceland, where we thought, some of these basic, like the nurses being trained on just basic, like have someone help you go clean and brush your teeth. I mean, those are minimal to me, those are minimal. And I'm sure as a nurse, you see that too. That's a minimal level of care.
yeah. I just saw somebody coming up to the door, but it's my neighbor putting my garbage cans away. So,
Okay. Well, thank you again, Kathy, for sharing the story. We hope
okay.
people will make sure to get travel insurance, especially medical. I think everyone out there, no matter your age, your current health status, should look into it. And that's where a site like Squaremouth can be just a starting point. You put in your basic information and you can choose varying levels of care based on what you think you need. If you find that you feel that you're pretty healthy, at least something minimal. I mean, we don't know if you accidentally step in front of a vehicle or end up in a situation that was not completely not your fault.
Fall and break a leg, or God forbid, have a head injury or something like that.
Right, right. Or you're on one of these tour buses. I mean, you decide to take a hop on, hop off bus. And we've all seen instances where the bus ends up in some sort of accident. You happen to be on that bus. Now you've got a wound of some kind. You want to get back to the United States and care that, you feel is the best, because it can be the difference between keeping that limb perhaps and not keeping the limb, or living and not living, let's be honest.
I
So,
yes.
so highly suggest checking out travel insurance. Thank you again, Kathy. And we're going to do another episode when we get some more input. So thanks again for your time.
Okay, good. Thanks for having me.